All right. We're live and recording, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining on the podcast today to meet a very special guest. Joseph Bell is joining us from somewhere in California, and I'll let him explain where he's at this present moment. Joseph, wonderful pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be on.
Fantastic. And just for background, Joseph, you can actually sort of give a little bit about your intro and career background. But one of the key aspects that really gravitated us towards Joseph and inviting him on our podcast was a very interesting and expert sort of post that he had on LinkedIn relating to the VFX industry and the state of the industry. And today, Joseph, we are actually sort of wanting to listen to you about your views on the VFX sector. Without further ado, would be great if you could actually sort of give us a quick intro and also a little bit about where you've been at and what are you currently doing.
Oh, sounds good. So I've been in the visual effects industry for 20 years at this point, and I'm very much a practitioner. I started out in production roles as a VFX producer, production manager, and I worked at a variety of smaller companies in Los Angeles at the start of my career before going up to San Francisco to join Industrial Light and Magic, Lucasfilm, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. After 3 years at ILM, I joined a startup in Los Angeles. I was in the garage with the founders of a company called Cosa VFX, which we scaled from the 5 of us in the garage to about 180 people over the next few years. Having seen a number of different companies operating in the industry and having friends all over the place, I became interested in understanding more the context of the VFX industry. When you've got your head down, working on projects, inside a company, it's pretty difficult to keep track of the broader trends in the industry and also to find ideas that maybe come from outside of the circle of your immediate competitors. So I went back to school a few years ago and snagged myself an MBA. Wow. I know a few other people in visual effects who've done that, but it's not especially common. And that gave me wonderful exposure to other industries like airlines and technology and automotive, where you can see commonalities with the visual effects industry. Visual effects industry is a unique combination of factors that you see elsewhere. So there were definitely some interesting takeaways to be had from that. Since then, I've worked in a variety of executive roles. I do a bit of consulting. I work with investors and folks engaged with mergers and acquisitions in the VFX industry.
Fascinating. What an exciting journey and story. Joseph, one of the things I was actually curious about was that you mentioned you are a practitioner, visual effects professional.
Yeah.
How would you define practitioner? Is it more on the business side or more on the...
Both. I mean, I've had the privilege to be in roles that were to do with sort of production management and studio leadership that let me work very closely with creatives, with artists on the factory floor. So, I have fond memories of standing at an artist's desk at 2 a.m. saying, I'm sorry, the director gave us more notes and he's going to be here at 9 a.m. So I'm going to stay with you. And just in the heat of production. That's what I mean by practitioner. I've sat in dailies. I've sat next to Oscar-winning visual effects supervisors, working with large teams of creative artists. Personally, I have, I think, something like 70 film and television credits, 2 Emmy nominations from actually having been on the factory floor doing the work.
Fascinating. I was curious about, since you actually have both on the, you both on the sort of a creative and techno-creative side as well as on the business side.
Yeah.
We've obviously had lots of dramatic events and changes in the last 4 years, starting with COVID, and then post that there's been all kinds of turmoil and slowdown. And, there's a peak of 2002 where there was just so many productions happening all around. And then we obviously have had, a little bit of a slowdown in the last maybe 5 or 6 quarters. In the last 4 years, what has been the most dramatic set of changes in the insides of the visual effects industry?
It's been a roller coaster for the industry, as you alluded to. I mean, I think 2022 we can say was the highest demand ever for visual effects. And you know, when I talk about the visual effects industry, it's driven in large part by the major Hollywood studios and other big spending, big budget entertainment and media clients. So when we look at the visual effects industry globally, you know, the vast majority of jobs that we know in the sort of high-end VFX market are tied to a relatively small number of big clients. So for a couple of different reasons, 2022 was this peak in demand for visual effects services, I think higher than ever before. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I think the one thing we all are aware of is the sort of content arms race between the streamers. You know, trying to attract eyeballs and subscriptions to their streaming services with, you know, very impressive high volumes of content. You know, there are different ways of looking at that, but I think we can say that the spending was at a rate that has turned out for many reasons to not be sustainable in the long run. So, you know, too much TV, quotation marks. You hear about superhero fatigue. But anyway, in the time leading up to 2022, it just grew year on year. Companies were ramping up to capitalize on this boom in demand. And we actually reached the point where there weren't enough visual effects artists, probably in the world, to take on the volume of work. So that was a point where it became, you know, an employee's market in terms of finding work. Rates and costs were less of a concern in the heat to simply get things done. You saw a couple of client-side studios purchase visual effects companies. You know, and you know, there was a lot of sort of consternation about that among investors looking in on the industry. Does this mean they're now going to bring all the work in-house? I don't think so. I think that those things were moves to protect a bit of capacity for the client-side studio if they needed it. So, you know, you have Scanline, you know, over with Netflix now, Pixamondo with Sony, but they still take on work for other clients. It's not like, you know, they just work for, you know, the studio that owns them. And I think, you know, it's really just a sort of hedge against running out of capacity at some point. Also going on at this time, as you know, you know, tandem with this tremendous spend, the era of peak TV. So we're seeing spending on television, you know, streaming content at a level that wasn't seen previously in the broadcast era. So, you know, the examples everyone knows: Game of Thrones on HBO, Lost in Space on Netflix, more recently Avatar: The Last Airbender. The budgets behind these productions, and specifically the visual effects budgets, are significantly larger than was ever the case on traditional broadcast television. So again, as visual effects companies scramble to capitalize on that, you saw more feature film companies starting to lean into episodic series and having to adjust their pipelines and workflows and their notion of who their clients were to try and capitalize on those goals. I think the final aspect of this, which again, you all know, is that COVID kept us all at home watching TV and playing video games. So that was another factor that contributed to this really, you know, quite large spike in demand that happened in 2021 and in 2022. With 2023 comes a dramatic correction in the market. And just to try and quantify that for you and your viewers, last year, 2023, 368 fewer scripted series were commissioned globally versus the year before. That's an enormous reduction in the percentage of sort of adult original scripted series being produced globally. I've seen a number as high as 36% for the drop in overall volume of productions in 2023 over 2022. I know that you and your customers are very well informed about these numbers. Specifically about the VFX and animation scene, some of the interesting data points we have come from places that offer tax incentives where the local government tracks the impact that the industry has. So that's a great source of sort of objective, independent data on what's happening in different parts of the world. So, for example, we know that in Quebec, the number of visual effects and animation jobs dropped 43% between 2022 and 2023.
Gosh.
43% reduction in the number of jobs in the sector in that geography. What's even more striking about that, and by the way, that's not just Quebec. It just so happens they do a good job of tracking this and reporting their data.
Right.
But we can anticipate similar levels elsewhere, whether that's sort of common knowledge or not. What's really striking about that is that in the first year of COVID, the reduction between 2019 and 2020 was 27% versus 36% last year. So this is actually percentage-wise a bigger drop than when COVID hit. It's also a larger percentage of a larger group of jobs. So again, the impact is pretty significant.
And you would say that there was a double whammy of sorts, right? There was an economic slowdown, but there was also the strikes in Hollywood and the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. The strikes played a role there, but I think they actually distracted a lot of people from the real drivers of this. So I think obviously production halted during the strikes. The knock-on effect for visual effects and animation providers comes a little later, of course, because the bulk of our work happens in post-production. So there's a sort of delay of several months. It sort of masked a slowdown in project commissioning by the major streamers. And, it's part of the driver here is that streamers other than Netflix now have to strive for profitability. We sort of come through this phase of spending perhaps unsustainable amounts on new content to attract viewers. Now we're sort of on the down slope on the back of that peak. And subscriptions are tailing off in terms of the number of new subscribers, and the amount of money that the streamers are willing to spend on content is dropping off. This sort of coincided with the Hollywood strikes. So I think a lot of people came out of the strikes feeling like the strikes are over and we're back. It's all going to start happening again. And we're very surprised with how slow production has been to pick back up. Again, just to point at some numbers, Disney, among others, is a company where the streaming service has been working towards becoming profitable. They saw a 70% drop in their new subscribers in 2023 versus 2022. So still growth, but slower growth than 2022. Disney decreased their content commissions by 47% last year.
Whoa.
So again, this is one of the major global employers of the visual effects industry. Their business priorities shift. Shareholders are calling for profitability. They need to dial back on expenses. Massive reduction in spend on content. There's also a question, aside from the volume of content, about how much return you see on it. So, for example, Amazon's Rings of Power, a very popular show, apparently cost $465 million in production, plus another $250 million for the rights to the IP. So if we do the math on that, Amazon would need to add over 5 million new subscribers to their service for a year to break even on that. Did they? Maybe they did. But again, the stakes, the bar is very high when you're spending that kind of money and you need to see a return on it.
That's right. Fascinating. I mean, you covered a lot of aspects relating to the business of the industry and the way it's sort of working, not in favor of new productions and new commissioning, right? One aspect that I was curious about was relating to the mix between television and films, movies. How does that play out for VFX? I'm guessing that television is much more sustainable because it's episodic, and is that true, or?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I think when we talk about television these days, the operating practices of the streamers come sort of front and center in my mind. Prior to that, when it was advertiser-driven broadcast television, you would have seasons that got cancelled halfway through when the numbers just weren't there. So, I always found that a very engaging sector to work in because there is the fast turnaround of the different episodes.
Right.
There's, perhaps less time to sort of go around in circles on creative or noodle things. So you have the satisfaction of getting something up on the screen in front of an audience. Back in the day, the length of a TV series, 22 episodes playing out over, the best part of a year. was somewhat comparable to a feature film, big visual effects feature film that would run for that similar kind of schedule. The flip side being that on a feature film, you kind of knew what was coming. You had, a pretty advanced version of the script on day one of post-production.
Right.
Whereas with television, you would discover as the season went on whether the budget was going up because the show was a success, whether we're going to do 13 episodes or 18 or 22. So there was a little bit less predictability in that regard.
Got understood. No, that's super helpful. And then, I think one of the aspects that I'd love to hear from you, and so would our viewers, is just the way you look at the visual effects business, the business model.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
what kind of pressure points is that in? Because I'm guessing that it requires a host of technologists. It requires creative folks. You need to staff up, and then whether projects come in or not. Explain a little bit about how the business is changing or how it is today.
Sure, absolutely. I'm notorious in my little corner of visual effects for having a strong opinion about the business model. I think it's often overlooked that this is a creative services business.
Yes.
Okay, even if Scanline is owned by Netflix, there's a client-vendor relationship there. And so when you go out as a visual effects company, yes, you're competing on cost. Yes, we all know that. You're dealing with VIP clients who have very high standards, who are doing something very complex, and they need customer service. And one thing I see time and time again is companies that sort of get caught up in the complexities of the creative challenges, of the technical challenges. Maybe there's a lot of internal, politics and systems or whatever it is, and they take their eye off the client. So the first thing I always say is this is a client services business, and if your clients aren't happy, it doesn't really matter how good it looks. If it arrives late, that's what people are going to remember. So, right. When I think about the sort of complexities of technology and the resources you need to play in this space, right. It's always about finding a method of delivering great client service at whichever level you're operating at. Right. So, we've seen the barriers to entry lower as technology gets better and more accessible. So the capability of a 5-person visual effects studio in a garage today, is probably up there with Industrial Light and Magic in early 1990s, or, whenever we want to point back to. So, definitely in terms of capability, the landscape has shifted. At the same time, you're trying to find a sort of product market fit for what clients of different scales need. So a 5-person visual effects company can do you beautiful work as a boutique on a small number of shots. But if your job is 1,000 shots and 60 characters, it's enormous, then you can't really break that up too easily between multiple companies. You need a vendor that has the scale, the internal capacity to hit that for you.
Interesting. That's a great point you make. And clearly, as we are sort of seeing the business model change and under stress, given the lack of demand, how do you see the industry moving forward? I'm going to also pivot this conversation into the chart that you had actually shared as part of your LinkedIn post.
Sure.
But I was curious about consolidation. Is that time here? Is it right now that we'll start seeing? I mean, we've seen a little bit of movement in that area, but what's the great point?
I think before we sort of talk the broad trends, I mean, here in 2024, the recovery is slower than many people in the industry expected, because again, it's not a direct result of the strikes. It's waiting for the streaming services to sort of loosen their purse strings on how much they want to spend on content again. So right now, I believe Disney's streaming service is already profitable or is on the verge of profitability. I think it'll be solidly there towards the end of the year. Others are following in the next 12 months or so. So my expectation is that they'll kind of cross that threshold for the investors. And then they'll discover that their audiences are feeling a lot of hunger for new content, which they haven't seen that much of for this past year or two. And so I fully expect that once they can show profitability again, suddenly there'll be a surge of demand for new content, including, of course, visual effects content. There are limitations to that. I mean, Bob Iger talked about roughly halving Marvel's output in Disney's Q2 earnings call, I understand. So, that reduction alone, if Marvel goes from 4 movies to 2 movies, from 4 TV shows to 2 TV shows a year, or something in that region, that reduction takes about 3% of the global VFX spend out of the market.
Wow.
That one decision. So, I don't mean to sort of say we're going to be back at 2022 levels, but I think we'll see a sort of surge in demand probably at some point next year, where streamers are wondering why audiences aren't, renewing their subscriptions because there's nothing new to watch. I think VFX will come back. It'll come back a bit differently, as you suggested. Jobs may have moved around the world. Consolidation may have happened, as you said. I think consolidation, we saw quite a bit of it in the years leading up to COVID. So, in terms of the sort of bigger pattern of the industry, I think of the 10 biggest visual effects groups out there, I believe just a handful of them are not groups at this point. I think it's 8 of the 10 largest players have multiple VFX studios under the same umbrella. And, we can talk a little bit about the ins and outs of how that actually works in practice. But yes, of the 10 largest players, that's about 35% of the industry, give or take. And 80% of that or more is these conglomerates of brands that have really been put together between 2010 and 2018 for the most part.
Fascinating. And I'm guessing that some of the consolidation might actually give some of these larger groups the freedom to actually move projects around, depending on whether that project is suited for a highly specialized boutique vis-a-vis a very large sort of project that requires multiple sort of touch points.
I mean, the driver is almost always tax incentives for the client, somewhat linked to cost of labor and, the costs that companies can pass on to clients. So, when groups sort of consolidate VFX brands, it gives them more flexibility to tap into incentives in different parts of the world. It gives them access to different labor pools in different places with different cost bases. So that seems to be the major driver. One thing I would add in terms of moving the work wherever it needs to go within the group is that you see 2 different M&A strategies being used. Some companies use explicitly what they call a house of brands strategy, where they basically put several VFX studios, each with their own brand identity, into a group together. But they don't necessarily push forward into trying to merge them or integrate them. I think Cinesight is a great example of that. They're explicit. They're a house of brands. They have terrific brands. They're very proud of them. They work somewhat autonomously. They attain their own identities. I would imagine, without knowing, sorry, Cinesight, if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that they continue to use the internal pipelines developed by each brand within the group. So when it comes to sharing work between the players within that group, certainly it can be done, but I wouldn't imagine it's done within a single integrated pipeline. And the other end of the spectrum, you've got Framestore, who are obviously one of the very big players in the space. They purchased C3M, including Method Studios, which is a pretty substantial visual effects studio separate to Framestore, a couple of hundred people. And my understanding, again, through sort of secondhand knowledge of this, is that Framestore did move Method Studios into Framestore's pipeline. Framestore, to acknowledge their scale, give them credit, their pipeline, I'm sure at that scale, is very strong in all different types of work. The pipeline you want for feature films, think of it like manufacturing cars. Your car factory for manufacturing BMWs is meaningfully different to your car factory for manufacturing Kias.
That's right, of course.
Right.
Yep.
So when
That's an interesting analogy,
yeah. So with say Framestore, I would imagine behind the scenes there, they've got a couple of different very highly tuned factories that will do these different types of manufacturing tasks, to extend that analogy. So they're able to move a company like Method into their pipeline hundreds of artists joining the Framestore pipeline. There they enjoy, the cost savings of not having to develop multiple pipelines, and the ability to move work very fluidly between groups.
Got it. Fascinating. No, one of the other related questions was the actual sort of chart that you'd actually shared. I'm going to pull that up, and I'd
Yeah.
love for you to sort of reference this in the way that the industry is changing. Let me
Absolutely.
just bring it up right now.
All right. So
Yeah.
today we
So
actually
talk a
have
little
a
bit
new
about
variation on the right here, which hasn't been shared before. So just to give a bit of background to this, we were talking about this just before the call, but aside from very large visual effects companies that I'm sure have their own business intelligence, government agencies tracking the impact tax incentives have on their local business communities, and a handful of others, Vitrina AI is one of them, tracking the data on the industry. There are relatively few reliable sources of sort of big picture industry data out there.
That's right.
So the chart you see here is really just looking at trends. I want to emphasize what we see here is changes and trends more than precise absolute size of the different companies. Nevertheless, you can see that there are some relatively very big companies sort of dominating the chart, and others that are changing at different rates. So on the left here, you can see how much change has happened over the past 2 years. So from last month, June 2024, back to June 2022. So on the left here, the last 2 years capture the tail end of this peak in demand during 2022. 2022 is the biggest year ever. You can see in dark blue on that chart, companies that grew very substantially relative to their headcount, prior to that, and the tail end of that growth. You see a few that were already shrinking for various reasons, getting smaller. It's a broad industry, different companies going through different challenges. But on the left, you can see definitely a strong core of growth there. On the right, you can see a version of the chart that shows what's happened over the past 6 months. Now, just so it's been said, the colors on the right are emphasized a bit because we're looking at a shorter time frame, so the change is a bit less dramatic in percentage terms. But just to kind of give a sense of the trends, you can see that on the right there are more companies with neutral colors that aren't growing, more companies in the red, which means that they've seen shrinkage over the past 6 months, from late last year to June this year. One other factor to bear in mind is that because we're looking at percentages here, the smaller companies go brighter colors because a small change in headcount is a bigger percentage for them.
Right.
So if you have a 5-person company, you hire 5 more people, bam, congratulations, 100% growth. If you have 1,000 people and you add 5 more, so that's reflected in the colors here also.
And essentially, you're sort of correlating the growth or degrowth in terms of staffing.
Yes. So this is
Companies
all
outgrow
based on headcount. I mean, the
headcount.
primary source of data here is LinkedIn. And
Right.
one of the reasons that LinkedIn is such a valuable data source is because it lets us get to freelancers.
Right. Right.
So, large portions of the industry do work on a freelance basis. It varies from company to company. I looked at a company the other day that has about 350 people working on animation jobs. If you look at their official company report, it says they have 167 employees.
Right.
Because the rest are contractors. So to actually get a sense of the volume of business that people are doing, the number of people in the industry, that is what we're looking at here, headcount. To your point, it does not speak to profitability. This particular chart doesn't tell us where the jobs are.
Yep.
And just in terms of the sort of response to this, so this little chart ended up getting looked at maybe 21,000 times by people and peers in the industry on LinkedIn. So I got a lot of reaction to it. And I've had a few people reach out and say, well, actually, my company had to lay off 60% of our staff because we didn't have work last year, and it's much, much smaller than the chart indicates. That's the case for a few of them. I've also had people reach out to me and go, that's spot on. How did you do it? So it is a mix. I think broadly speaking, what we see here are fairly reliable trends, again, more than the absolute size of companies.
And it's an indicator, it's a bellwether for what has happened over the last couple of years. And then
Exactly.
specifically the right side chart is sort of showing us what's happened in the last 6 months.
Yeah, very few companies of any size growing substantially in the last 6 months.
Right.
The ones that have grown in percentage terms tend to be smaller,
Right.
and a lot more in the red and the pink.
And look, I mean, I think one of the things that we are doing at Vitrina is sort of doing, so our system syncs up every day. So on a daily basis, we are updating what kind of works that is getting attached to different VFX houses. And we have our own sort of estimates of where the growth is and which are the most active companies that are attracting a lot of that work. But and where those indicators help is really to the buyers, folks, production, post production heads who are sort of looking
Yep.
for the right partners for the right projects. Um, what's your sense of the both the investor community as well as the buyer community? Where is their head at this point as they look at VFX?
Well, on the investor side, there's a surprising amount of M&A activity around visual effects companies at the moment, given the challenges of the past year or so. A lot of that is to do with helping them transition into different ways of working,
That's
different revenue streams. So if you look at the
That's right.
$200 million investment that DNEG just received, they give three things they're going to do with that investment. Number one, IP content
That's right.
ownership, development in the production sense. Number two, they're going to explore the use of AI tools in production. And number three, they're going to build an experience center in the Middle East. So none of those things are really bolstering or driving forward their business as a visual effects service provider working for other clients. The investment seems designed to help them ramp up in other areas. On the buyer side, I think buyers are under pressure to deliver more bang for the buck, if you will. So there's more scrutiny about where the work is being done, whether we can use technology to streamline the process. On the other hand, these are top tier clients we're talking about. These big Hollywood shows that really drive the global visual effects market are not looking to compromise quality to save a buck. They're still looking for partners who can deliver the top tier quality they need to speak to audiences worldwide and have that quality of product. So that is not going to change.
That's right. That's right. Fascinating. So in the last segment, one of the things, Joseph, that I wanted to sort of touch upon is you talked a lot about the supply demand sort of the effect of that and the impact of that on the industry. Talked about the business part of it. In the last segment, I do want to sort of look at the dramatic changes in technology that have actually happened in the last 4 years, right? A lot more content on the cloud. Everything is now really camera to cloud. As we've been hearing that term for some time. It's truly, I think, COVID was a big instigator of that. Uh, Generative AI, gaming engines in a big way, and then of course virtual production. Which of these four do you think have had the most amount of impact, in the last 4 years? If I can just put you on the spot, right there.
Well, I think I'm going to surprise everyone by saying that I think real-time 3D graphics technology is it's going to have the most lasting impact on the industry of the technologies you've named. So for
Interesting.
virtual production and AI, they're both fantastic technologies. We should be figuring out how to use them as part of our visual effects workflows.
That's right.
At the same time, they're best for specific use cases. So for the virtual production side of things, really, there's a lot that you get for free, so to speak, when you film on a real location, live action, that is expensive to recreate on a virtual production stage. So the best use cases for virtual production are still things like it's a science fiction setting where everything is artificial, or it's something that's too dangerous for us to shoot safely live action in real life. Those are great use cases for virtual production. 2 or 3 years ago, investors were asking me whether I thought live action filmmaking was going to
Right.
be drastically reduced because everyone would be shooting on virtual production stages. I don't think so. I don't think it's cost effective, actually. It's a fantastic tool for specific use cases. In terms of AI, lots of visual effects studios are already using, let's call it machine learning, as part of their visual effects workflows. You can use it to increase efficiency, to increase quality. It can reduce the amount of manual labor where an artist has to sit there just sort of, working through something manually. On the other hand, my understanding of the current generation of generative AI image generators is that the way they work doesn't really allow us to address client notes the way that our clients expect them to be addressed. So if you imagine we're working on, say, the new Jurassic Park movie, the director says, hey, the dinosaur third on the left in the back row, could you please raise its left arm 15 degrees? Well, my understanding is that AI image generators don't yet understand the objects in the images they generate as if they're sort of three-dimensional objects with different parts of the object that can be manipulated in 3D space. They're generating images from other images. So that makes it very difficult to address the very detailed, very specific notes that we get from our brand of top-tier client wanting to have the creative exactly the way they want it. And so for that reason, I think it's going to be a bit of a while before we see the overall visual effects workflow and the ways all the different departments interact, being sort of overhauled in a general way by AI tools. For the time being, the AI tools are going to slot into specific smaller steps in the pipeline. I'm going to pick real-time 3D graphics as, for me, the most exciting technology because we're seeing a sort of convergence of different use cases and revenue streams around that technology. And visual effects companies that are equipped to do that type of work are going to have access to new opportunities and new clients. So, for example, VR, AR, XR has a very strong component to real-time graphics technology, immersive experiences, interactive experiences, video games. One great example of this is that video game companies are increasingly using real-time engines to generate their game cinematics in-engine during the game. So you would think on the face of it that might be less work for their external development partners who do cinematics. Previously, they would have pre-rendered essentially animated movies, and sent them into the video game company. In fact, the video game companies still need capable partners to help them get that work done with expertise in storytelling and character development, hyperreal animation, things like this, that don't necessarily come straight out of developing the game. So the companies that are well positioned to work in engine are really going to enjoy as many, if not more, opportunities to work on cinematics as they did previously.
That's right. Fascinating. No, that's you make great points about the impact of each of these technologies on the industry and where we are headed. Outlook for the year, I think you already covered that, Joseph. You have a very optimistic outlook of how the year is going to progress, given some of the recent action. What's your sort of key focus at this point as we head towards the second half of the year?
As the work starts to come back, I think it's going to come back a little differently. So my focus for the rest of the year is really on understanding what those differences are and helping companies and investors understand where they need to be and what they need to be doing to keep pace with them.
Fantastic. Joseph, this is awesome. I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. We covered specifically the chart that really really got us very interested in having this conversation with you. And then, super excited about, the coverage of the demand supply, the business side, and then, of course, the technological side in the visual effects industry. Thank you so much for your time today and talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.